There's a strange kind of silence that hurts more than rejection. Not the silence after someone says no, the silence after someone almost says yes, but never does. You know that feeling. When a conversation felt different somehow. She stayed a little longer than she needed to. She smiled, then looked away. Her fingers almost brushed yours, but didn't. And later that night, lying in bed, your mind kept asking the same question. Was I imagining all of it? That question follows more men than anyone realizes. Before we go any further, if these conversations help you understand people, and maybe even understand yourself a little better, consider subscribing. It helps this community grow, and I'd love to have you here for the next one. Now, most people think love disappears because feelings aren't there. Often, that's not what happens. Sometimes feelings are exactly the reason people disappear, because caring about someone creates risk. And risk wakes up every fear we've spent years trying to hide. That's where everything becomes complicated. I've watched people sit across from each other in cafes for 2 hours, laughing about absolutely nothing, while both of them were secretly terrified that saying one honest sentence could ruin everything. It's almost painful to watch. Not because they don't like each other, because they do. More than either one wants to admit. Maybe you've lived something like that. She asked about your day, not once, but again later, as if she wanted details no one else cared about. She remembered something you mentioned weeks ago, something tiny, your favorite coffee, the name of your dog when you were a kid, the interview you were nervous about. You noticed. But then, she suddenly became distant, and your mind immediately filled the silence. She changed her mind. I waited too long. She was just being nice. Maybe, but maybe not. People don't always pull away because they're losing interest. Sometimes they pull away because they're becoming emotionally invested. That sounds backwards, doesn't it? Yet it happens more often than most people notice. When someone starts caring, the stakes quietly change. Now rejection would actually hurt. Now losing you would mean something. So instead of moving closer, they hesitate. Not because they're cold, because they're afraid. There's something almost nobody notices. Fear rarely looks like fear. It often looks like mixed signals. One day she's warm, the next she's quieter. She replies quickly, then suddenly takes hours. She starts conversations, then ends them early. To someone watching from the outside, it looks confusing. Inside her mind, though, it may simply be a battle between hope and self-protection. That doesn't automatically mean she's falling for you. Life is more complicated than that. Stress exists, timing exists, personal history exists. But when this pattern repeats alongside genuine emotional investment, it's worth paying attention, not jumping to conclusions. Just paying attention. Think about the last time you really cared about someone. Did you become perfectly confident? Or did you suddenly become painfully aware of every message you sent? You reread texts. You wondered if you sounded too interested. You questioned whether you should wait before replying. You noticed things you would have ignored with anyone else. Funny, isn't it? We often judge other people's hesitation, while forgetting how hesitant we become ourselves. Love has a way of making intelligent people overthink simple moments. A joke, a glance, a delayed reply, a goodbye that lasted 1 second longer than usual, and then there's eye contact. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, the real kind. She looks at you. You notice. She notices you noticed. And almost immediately she looks somewhere else, not because she wanted the moment to end, sometimes because it suddenly felt too real. Those tiny moments say more than long conversations ever could. But don't rush, because the next sign isn't something she does when you're together. It's something she does after you've already walked away. And that's where many men completely misread what's really happening. Have you ever walked away from someone, and then, 10 minutes later, your phone lights up? Not with anything important. Just, did you get home okay? Or maybe a funny picture that reminded her of something you said. On the surface, it doesn't seem like much. Anyone could send a message like that. But psychology is rarely about one moment. It's about patterns. It's about the quiet effort people make when no one is asking them to. Someone who fears rejection often struggles with direct emotional expression. So instead of saying, "I wanted to keep talking to you," they find another reason to reopen the conversation. A random meme, a question they already know the answer to, a song, a photo of the coffee shop you mentioned last week. Small doors, that's what they create. Little openings. Because a little opening feels safer than a big confession, and if you don't walk through it, well, they can always pretend it wasn't important. It's emotional protection disguised as casual conversation. I've seen this happen so many times. A woman laughs easily around a man. She enjoys every conversation. Then they say goodbye. An hour passes. She starts wondering, did I talk too much? Did he think I was strange? Maybe I seemed too interested. Those thoughts don't mean she's deeply in love, but they can mean your opinion has started to matter more than she's comfortable admitting. That's usually where fear begins, because once someone's opinion matters, so does their rejection. There's another moment that's easy to miss. You're talking in a group, everyone's laughing, people interrupt each other, the conversation moves quickly, yet somehow, she keeps checking whether you're laughing too, whether you heard her joke, whether you agree with what she said. It's subtle, almost invisible. Human beings naturally look toward people whose reactions matter emotionally. Not always because they're attracted. Sometimes it's admiration, sometimes comfort, sometimes friendship. Context always matters. But when attraction enters the picture, those quick little glances become more frequent, almost automatic. She isn't trying to perform for the whole room. Without realizing it, she's hoping one particular person understands her. Another clue hides in something most men misunderstand completely. Nervous contradictions. One afternoon she's playful, she teases you, she seems completely relaxed. The next time, she's strangely formal, almost careful. You wonder, which version is the real her? Maybe both. Confidence isn't constant, especially around someone whose opinion feels emotionally important. Even confident people have days when vulnerability feels heavier. Imagine standing at the edge of a swimming pool. Some days you jump without thinking. Other days you spend 5 minutes testing the water with your foot. The water didn't change, your emotional state did. Relationships often work exactly like that. This is why consistency isn't always the first sign of growing feelings. Sometimes inconsistency appears first. Not because someone is playing games, because they're arguing with themselves. Don't get attached. You're getting attached. Be normal. Why did you say that? It's exhausting. And while all of this is happening inside, the outside world simply sees someone acting a little different. Most people never notice the battle underneath. Then something even stranger begins. She starts remembering the version of you that almost nobody else sees. Not your job, not your achievements, not your appearance. The quieter pieces, the story about your grandfather, the dream you gave up, the hobby you were embarrassed to mention because it felt childish. Weeks later, months, sometimes, she brings it up again, almost casually, as though she's been carrying that conversation with her. That kind of memory usually isn't accidental. Emotion strengthens attention. We remember what touches us, not because we're trying to, because our minds quietly decide, this person matters. But here's where many men accidentally ruin what could have become something beautiful. They assume that if someone cares, they should become easier to read. Oddly enough, for many people the opposite happens. The closer they feel emotionally, the more carefully they protect themselves. And that protection creates one of the most misunderstood signs of all. It looks almost like avoidance. Almost. But there's one tiny difference that changes everything. Avoidance has a strange reputation. Most people see it as proof that someone isn't interested. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes people really are pulling away because they don't feel a connection. But not always. There is another kind of distance, quieter, more confusing, the kind that seems to appear only after something meaningful happens. Maybe you shared a personal story. Maybe the two of you held eye contact just a little too long. Maybe there was a moment when neither of you knew what to say, and somehow the silence didn't feel awkward. It felt full. Then the next day, she's different, not cold, just careful. Messages become shorter. She seems busy. She ends the conversation first. You sit there staring at your phone, wondering what changed overnight. The difficult part is that fear often speaks in the language of distance. When emotions become real, some people instinctively slow everything down, not because they're losing interest, because they're trying to understand what they're feeling before those feelings begin to control them. Think about the last decision that truly mattered to you. Did you rush into it, or did you pause? Read the situation again. Question yourself. Hope you weren't making a mistake. Our hearts can behave the same way, especially if they've been disappointed before. That doesn't mean someone is emotionally unavailable. It doesn't mean they're secretly testing you. It simply means they're human, and humans aren't always consistent when something precious feels uncertain. There's another sign that's easy to miss because it doesn't happen during your best conversations. It happens after you make a mistake. Maybe you're late. Maybe you misunderstand something she says. Maybe you tell a joke that doesn't land. You expect the atmosphere to change. Instead, she gives you room. She doesn't immediately assume the worst about you. She asks questions before making conclusions. That kind of patience often grows where emotional investment already exists. People usually spend emotional energy where they see possibility. When someone doesn't care, small misunderstandings are easy reasons to drift away. When they do care, they're more likely to wonder if there's another explanation, not because they're ignoring reality, because they're hoping reality is kinder than their first fear. Now let me tell you about something that almost never gets talked about. The smile that disappears too quickly. You've probably seen it without realizing. She sees you unexpectedly. Her face changes before she has time to think. A genuine smile appears, not the polite kind, the kind that reaches her eyes. Then, almost as quickly, she reins it back in, as if she suddenly became aware of herself. That tiny shift lasts only a second. Most people miss it, because genuine emotion often arrives before self-consciousness catches up. It's one of those little windows where feelings show themselves before fear has time to close the curtain. Of course, no single moment proves attraction. Real life isn't built on one glance or one smile. It's built on patterns, a dozen small moments that quietly begin pointing in the same direction. And patterns reveal something words often hide. Then there's curiosity, not the obvious kind, the deeper kind. She asks questions that don't have practical answers. What were you like in high school? What made you choose that career? If you could live anywhere, where would you go? Those aren't questions about information. They're questions about identity. She's trying to understand the person behind the routine, behind the jokes, behind the confidence you show everyone else. Because attraction often creates a desire to understand someone, not just impress them. And here's something I've noticed over the years. Many men think they're being evaluated by women. Sometimes, the opposite is happening. She's quietly wondering whether she's enough for you, whether you'll lose interest once you know her better, whether she's reading your signals correctly, whether she's about to embarrass herself. It's easy to forget that insecurity doesn't belong to one gender. It belongs to anyone who has something to lose. That's why two people can care deeply about each other and still spend months trapped in uncertainty. Not because love is missing, because courage arrives more slowly than emotion. But eventually, emotion starts leaking out in ways neither person intends. And when it does, it often happens through something so ordinary that almost everyone overlooks it. A change in the way she makes space for you in her everyday life. That's where everything starts becoming much harder to ignore. There's a quiet shift that happens when someone begins imagining you as part of their everyday life. It doesn't arrive with dramatic speeches. It slips in unnoticed. One day you're simply someone she enjoys talking to. Then, without either of you saying it out loud, you become someone she starts including in the little spaces of her day. She sends you a picture of the sky on her way home. Not because the sky is extraordinary, because, for a brief moment, you came to mind. She walks past a bookstore and remembers the novel you mentioned weeks ago. She hears a song while driving and catches herself wondering if you'd like it. These moments aren't planned, they're spontaneous, and that's exactly why they matter. Our minds naturally connect meaningful people with ordinary experiences. It's one of the quiet ways affection begins weaving itself into daily life. Then something else starts happening. She begins inviting you into conversations that don't really need your opinion, but she wants it anyway. Which jacket looks better? What do you think about this idea? Am I overthinking this? She's not asking because you're the only person who could answer. She's asking because your perspective has become emotionally valuable. That's different. When someone's opinion starts carrying extra weight, it's often because their place in our emotional world has changed. Still, she may hesitate to reveal just how much it matters, so she'll keep the questions light, safe, almost casual. But underneath those small conversations is a much bigger one she's not ready to have. Do you see me the way I'm starting to see you? That's a frightening question to ask directly. So people circle around it. They test the water without calling it a test, not to manipulate, to protect themselves. There's another moment I wish more people noticed. You're telling a story. Maybe it's funny, maybe it's embarrassing, maybe it's something you've never shared before. Everyone else hears the words. She watches your face. That difference is easy to overlook. Some people listen for information, others listen for emotion. When someone is emotionally invested, they're often paying attention to what isn't being said. The pause before you answer, the smile that doesn't quite reach your eyes, the laugh that sounds just a little forced. It's as if they're quietly asking themselves, "Are you really okay?" Not because they believe you're fragile, because your emotional world has started to matter to them. And caring can be frightening, especially if they've learned somewhere in the past that caring sometimes leads to disappointment. This doesn't mean they're broken, it simply means they're cautious. Many people carry old experiences into new relationships without realizing it, not as rules, as reflexes. Someone who once opened their heart too quickly may now move more slowly. Someone who felt ignored before may hesitate before expressing affection. Someone who was misunderstood may carefully measure every vulnerable sentence. That doesn't erase genuine feelings. Sometimes it only changes how those feelings appear. Then comes one of the strongest signs. And strangely, it's also one of the quietest. She starts relaxing around you, not immediately. At first, she might seem polished, always saying the right thing, always trying to look composed. But over time, little imperfections begin to appear. She laughs louder than she meant to. She tells you a story that makes her look awkward. She admits she was nervous about something. She lets you see a side of herself she doesn't usually show. Real closeness often begins there, not when someone looks perfect, but when they stop trying so hard to, because pretending is exhausting. Safety allows authenticity, and authenticity often grows where affection feels possible. But here's the part that surprises many men. Just because someone feels safe with you doesn't automatically mean they'll confess their feelings. Sometimes safety makes the fear even greater, because now there's actually something precious to lose. Now rejection wouldn't just sting. It would leave an empty space where hope had quietly been growing. So instead of saying what they feel, they wait. They look for one more sign. One more reason to believe their heart will be welcomed instead of rejected, and without realizing it, they often begin sending the clearest signal of all, not through words, not through grand romantic gestures, but through the way they look at you when they think you're not looking. That fleeting expression, the one that disappears the instant your eyes meet, may reveal more than either of you is ready to admit. There's something almost heartbreaking about the way people look at someone they care about when they believe no one is watching. It's different from the smile they wear in conversation, different from the laugh they share with everyone else. This look is quieter, less guarded. For a second, they stop managing themselves. They simply feel. Then you turn your head, your eyes meet, and just like that, the expression disappears. She looks away. She reaches for her phone. She suddenly finds something incredibly interesting on the other side of the room. Most men think they imagined it. Sometimes they did. Our minds can create stories when we desperately want certainty. That's why it's important to remember something throughout everything we've talked about today. No single sign tells you how someone feels, not a smile, not a text, not a glance. People are wonderfully complicated, but when many of these moments begin appearing together, when they form a pattern instead of standing alone, they can tell a story that's difficult to ignore. And maybe the most important part of that story has very little to do with her. It has everything to do with you. Because here's what often happens. A man notices these little signs. He starts feeling hopeful. Then fear quietly enters the room. What if I'm wrong? What if I embarrass myself? What if she was only being kind? So he waits. She waits too. Days become weeks, weeks become months. Two people, both hoping the other one will be brave first. It's one of the saddest emotional standstills you'll ever see. Not because love isn't there, because fear keeps speaking louder than curiosity. I've met people years later who could remember one person they never confessed their feelings to. Not with anger, not even with regret exactly. Just a quiet wondering. What would have happened if I'd said something? That question can stay with someone much longer than rejection itself. Rejection hurts, it really does, but uncertainty has a way of replaying itself, again and again. Our minds keep trying to finish stories that never had an ending. That's why emotional courage isn't about guaranteeing the outcome you want. No one can promise that. Psychology can't promise it. Experience can't promise it. People are free to feel what they feel. What courage does offer is something quieter. It frees you from guessing forever. And there's another reason this matters. When someone genuinely cares about you but fears rejection, they're usually not looking for perfection. They're looking for emotional safety. Someone who listens instead of rushing. Someone who can be honest without becoming harsh. Someone who understands that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's trust in its earliest form. If you become that kind of person, something interesting happens. Even when a particular relationship doesn't work out, you stop chasing certainty through mind reading. You start creating clarity through honest conversations. That's a very different way of living. And people notice it. Not because it's dramatic, because it feels rare. So if you recognize several of these signs in someone, don't rush to write a romantic ending in your mind. Stay curious. Pay attention to the whole pattern. Give the connection room to breathe. Sometimes the strongest relationships don't begin with perfect confidence. They begin with two imperfect people who slowly realize they're both carrying the same fear. One is afraid of reaching out. The other is afraid of reaching back too soon. Then, almost unexpectedly, one person chooses honesty over silence. Not with a grand speech, not with pressure, just a simple, genuine moment. And that small moment changes everything. Maybe not because it guarantees love, but because it finally replaces endless questions with something far more peaceful. The truth. If today's conversation felt strangely familiar, if parts of it reminded you of someone you can't quite stop thinking about, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Sometimes, sharing one honest sentence is the first step toward understanding feelings that have been quietly waiting to be acknowledged. And if you'd like to keep exploring the hidden psychology behind attraction, connection, and emotional confidence, stay with me. There are still so many quiet truths about love that most people never notice until it's too late.